Imagine waking before sunrise and discovering that 185,000 soldiers had fallen in a single night. No battle had been fought. No walls had been broken. No army had arrived to rescue Jerusalem. Yet, when the first light touched the mountains of Judah, one of the greatest military forces on earth had become silent. Only hours earlier, those soldiers had laughed at the city. They mocked its king. They mocked its people. They even mocked its God. They believed Jerusalem was finished. By every human calculation, they were right. Assyria was not an ordinary enemy. It was an empire built on fear. Its armies had crossed deserts, shattered kingdoms, and crushed cities that once believed themselves untouchable. Wherever Assyria marched, walls collapsed, kings surrendered, and entire nations disappeared beneath the weight of its power. Now that empire stood outside Jerusalem. From the highest point of the city wall, King Hezekiah stared into the distance. Dust covered the horizon. Thousands of soldiers moved across the land like a dark river of steel. Their banners snapped in the wind. Their weapons flashed beneath the sun. Their war drums rolled through the valleys long before the army reached the city. Jerusalem had faced enemies before, but never anything like this. The first reports arrived before sunset. More troops were coming, then more again. By nightfall, the valleys surrounding Jerusalem were filled with enemy camps. Their fires covered the mountains like fallen stars. Every flame meant another group of soldiers waiting for morning. Every banner marked another unit prepared to attack. A guard approached Hezekiah with fear in his eyes. "Your Majesty, the army is still growing." Hezekiah did not turn. "How many?" The guard hesitated. "Too many to count." That answer spread through Jerusalem faster than any official message. Families closed their doors. Merchants abandoned the streets. Soldiers gathered on the walls, but few of them spoke. Everyone understood what the silence meant. No one was coming to save them. No allied army waited beyond the mountains. No secret weapon could destroy the enemy camps. No military plan could erase the difference between one frightened city and 185,000 trained soldiers. Humanly speaking, Jerusalem had already fallen. But the people inside the city did not know that this story had never been placed in human hands. As darkness settled over Jerusalem, Assyrian commanders walked among their troops with complete confidence. They had conquered stronger cities than this one. They had defeated larger armies. To them, Jerusalem was not a challenge. It was simply the next name to be added to the list. Some soldiers sharpened their swords beside the fires. Others repaired shields or rested near the siege equipment. Laughter moved through the camps. The men spoke about victory as though it had already happened. By sunrise, they said Jerusalem would belong to Assyria. Inside the city, the mood could not have been more different. Mothers held their children close. Fathers remained awake. Priests lit lamps in the temple. Guards watched the enemy fires multiply across the mountains. Every hour made the situation worse. Then an Assyrian message reached the city. It did not offer peace. It offered humiliation. The enemy mocked Hezekiah for trusting God. They reminded him of the nations Assyria had already destroyed. One by one, their cities had fallen. Their gods had not saved them. Their kings had not stopped the invasion. Why should Jerusalem be any different? The message was designed to destroy faith before the first arrow was fired. Fear often wins long before a battle begins. It enters the mind, repeats the same impossible numbers, and convinces people that surrender is the only reasonable choice. 185,000 soldiers. One city. No escape. Hezekiah carried the enemy's message into the temple. Outside, the empire prepared for war. Inside, a king prepared to pray. He placed the words before God and knelt. There was no speech about military strength, no promise of human bravery, no attempt to pretend the danger was smaller than it really was. The danger was real. The enemy was powerful. Jerusalem was weak. Hezekiah simply asked God to see what had been written, hear the threats, and save the city so the nations would know that the Lord alone was God. That prayer did not make the army disappear. The campfires still burned. The siege equipment still stood. The soldiers still waited, but something had changed. Jerusalem had stopped pretending it could save itself. Sometimes the turning point of a story comes before anything visible happens. No thunder shakes the ground. No light appears in the sky. Nothing outside seems different. Yet the direction of history has already changed. That night, a message came from the prophet Isaiah. God had heard Hezekiah. Jerusalem would not be handed over to Assyria. The enemy king would not enter the city. He would not shoot an arrow against it. He would not raise a siege ramp against its walls. To anyone standing on those walls, the promise sounded impossible. The Assyrian army was everywhere. Its soldiers covered the valleys. Its commanders were already planning the attack. Yet Isaiah declared that Jerusalem would survive. Now the city had to live between two realities. One was visible. 185,000 soldiers waited outside. The other had been spoken. Jerusalem would not fall. That is one of the hardest places anyone can stand. The promise has been given, but the danger remains. The answer has been spoken, but nothing has changed in front of your eyes. Hezekiah returned to the wall. The enemy camp looked exactly the same. The fires burned. The guards marched. The banners moved in the night wind. Nothing appeared different, but the king no longer looked at the valley in the same way. Before, he saw an army too large to defeat. Now he saw a situation God had already addressed. The Assyrians did not know this. They continued celebrating. Their commanders spoke openly of tomorrow's victory. Soldiers laughed at the city walls. Some called toward the guards, promising that Jerusalem would be destroyed when morning came. They believed silence meant weakness. They believed delay meant fear. They believed God had done nothing. They were wrong. The night deepened. Clouds moved across the moon. The wind strengthened. Campfires flickered throughout the valley. Enemy banners snapped against their poles. Some soldiers noticed the change in the weather. Most ignored it. They had seen wind before. They had slept beneath storms. Nothing about the night seemed powerful enough to threaten an army of that size. But the real danger was not coming from another army. No cavalry crossed the mountains. No hidden soldiers approached from the darkness. No horns announced a rescue. Jerusalem would not be saved by human force. The hours passed slowly. Inside the city, people waited. Some prayed in their homes. Some gathered near the temple. Some stood behind the soldiers on the walls, trying to see what morning might bring. The city was quiet, but not peaceful. Every person knew that dawn usually meant battle. On the other side of the walls, the Assyrian camp began to settle. Fires burned lower. Soldiers returned to their tents. Guards took their positions. Commanders rested, convinced that the next day would bring another easy victory. Nothing could stop them. At least that was what they believed. There is a moment in many disasters when confidence becomes blindness. The warning signs are visible, but pride refuses to recognize them. Assyria had reached that moment. Its victories had taught the empire the wrong lesson. It believed success meant invincibility. It believed conquered nations proved that no power could resist it. It believed the God of Jerusalem could be mocked like every powerless idol it had seen before. The empire had confused patience with weakness, and now the night was almost over. Inside Jerusalem, Isaiah's promise was repeated quietly among the people. Some believed immediately. Others wanted to believe but struggled whenever they looked toward the enemy fires. Faith did not erase the number of soldiers outside. It did not make the walls higher or the city stronger. It gave the people a reason not to surrender before morning. A young guard stood on the wall beside his father. Both watched the enemy camp in silence. "Do you believe the prophet?" the son asked. The older man waited before answering. "I believe God has heard us." It was not a military answer. It did not explain what would happen. But in a city with no visible escape, it was enough to keep them standing. Hours passed. The temple lamps remained lit. Priests continued praying. Hezekiah's commanders stayed near the gates, prepared to defend the city even though they knew the defense could not last. No one inside Jerusalem knew whether the next sound would be thunder war horns, or the crash of stones against the walls. The waiting became its own battle. Every shadow beyond the valley looked like movement. Every gust of wind sounded like distant marching. Every fading fire raised another question. Then the city noticed something unusual. The Assyrian camp had become quiet earlier than expected. At first, no one considered it important. An army preparing for battle needed rest. Silence before dawn was normal, but this silence felt different. It spread across the entire valley. No horses cried out. No guards called between positions. No metal struck metal. The enormous camp seemed to be holding its breath. Jerusalem's soldiers watched carefully, unsure whether the stillness meant an attack was about to begin. They tightened their grip on their weapons. Nothing came. 1 hour passed, then another. The stars moved across the sky while the city remained frozen between fear and hope. Far below, the enemy army did not move. The people could not see what had happened. Darkness concealed the tents and soldiers. From the walls, the camp still appeared intact. That made the silence even more disturbing. If the Assyrians were preparing some hidden strategy, Jerusalem had no way to stop it. If they were moving troops in darkness, the attack could begin anywhere. Hezekiah refused to leave the wall. Isaiah's words remained in his mind. The enemy would not enter the city. No arrow would conquer Jerusalem. The promise was clear. The night was not. This was the final test before morning. Whether the king would trust what had been spoken while everything around him remained uncertain. He stayed. The guards stayed. Jerusalem waited. And beyond the walls, the power that had terrified nations had already been broken. Somewhere beyond the walls, the battlefield became strangely still. The wind moved through thousands of tents. Shields rested against wooden stakes. Spears lay beside sleeping soldiers. The war machines waited in silence. Jerusalem remained awake. Hezekiah looked over the valley one more time. The scale of the army was overwhelming. Even in darkness, its presence covered the land. He could not see an answer. He could only hold onto the promise. No one inside the city saw heaven move. No one watched an angel descend. No trumpet announced that divine judgment had entered the camp. The miracle did not ask for an audience. It began in darkness. The angel of the Lord went out against the Assyrian army. Scripture gives no long description of the moment. It does not explain every movement. It does not tell us what the soldiers saw or whether they understood what had come among them. It simply reveals the result. One heavenly messenger entered the camp of the greatest army in the region. That was enough. The empire had brought 185,000 soldiers. Heaven sent one. No swords clashed against Jerusalem's guards. No city gates were broken. No battlefield filled with competing armies. The battle belonged entirely to God. Throughout the camp, the power of Assyria ended before sunrise. The soldiers who had mocked Jerusalem never reached its walls. The commanders who promised victory never gave the order to attack. The army that seemed unstoppable became silent in the night. Inside Jerusalem, no one yet knew what had happened. The people waited for the first war horn. It never sounded. They waited for the pounding of marching feet. It never came. They waited for stones to strike the walls and arrows to darken the sky. Nothing happened. The silence outside the city became more frightening than the noise had been. A guard narrowed his eyes toward the enemy camp. No movement. Another guard looked across the valley. Still nothing. The fires were dying, but soldiers were not rising. Morning slowly reached the mountains. The first light touched the walls of Jerusalem. The city still stood. Its gates remained closed. Its towers remained untouched. Not one Assyrian soldier had entered. Hezekiah watched the camp from above. Something was wrong. An army that large should have filled the valley with noise before dawn. Officers should have been shouting. Horses should have been moving. Siege crews should have been preparing their machines. Instead, there was silence. The gates opened cautiously. A small group of soldiers stepped outside. Every man expected a trap. They moved slowly down the road, weapons ready, eyes fixed on the tents. No arrows came. No guards challenged them. No commander called for an attack. They entered the edge of the camp. Shields lay where they had been left. Spears rested beside the tents. Food remained near extinguished fires. Everything looked ready for war. But the army was gone. Then they saw the truth. The Assyrian soldiers had fallen during the night. Not hundreds, not thousands. 185,000. The number that had terrified Jerusalem now became the number that revealed the scale of its deliverance. The soldiers returned toward the city. Their faces told the story before their words did. The enemy had been defeated. No battle had been fought. Jerusalem had been saved. The news moved through the city like fire. Doors opened. Families rushed into the streets. Priests lifted their hands. Soldiers who had expected to die stood on the walls in disbelief. Only hours earlier, the enemy campfires had looked like stars covering the mountains. Now the valley was silent. Hezekiah returned to the temple, not as a king celebrating his own strategy, but as a man who understood exactly why the city still stood. Jerusalem had not been saved by stronger walls. It had not been saved by a larger army. It had not been saved by political power. God had fought the battle alone. The Assyrian king escaped the disaster and returned to his own land. The empire that had mocked Jerusalem left without entering its gates. The city it had promised to destroy remained untouched. History would remember the night, not because of a great duel, not because of a brilliant military plan, not because an army arrived at the last moment. It would be remembered because one of the strongest empires on earth discovered that power has limits. Human power can conquer cities, can intimidate kings, can silence nations, but it cannot overrule God. Jerusalem had spent the night staring at an impossible situation. Every visible fact pointed toward destruction. The army was too large. The city was too weak. The enemy was too close. Yet the final outcome was never controlled by the size of the army. The people could see the soldiers. They could count the fires. They could hear the threats. What they could not see was the power already moving beyond their walls. That is why the night outside Jerusalem became more than a story of ancient warfare. It became a reminder. The loudest voice does not always hold the greatest authority. The largest army does not always control the future. And the darkest night does not mean morning has been defeated. Assyria arrived believing Jerusalem was alone. It was not. The empire believed the city's prayers were useless. They were not. It believed its past victories guaranteed another one. They did not. By sunrise, everything Assyria believed had collapsed. The city remained. The walls remained. The people remained. Only the enemy's confidence had disappeared. For generations, the people of Jerusalem would remember what they saw when the gates opened that morning. Parents would tell their children about the night no one could sleep. Soldiers would remember the silence before dawn. Priests would repeat the story of the king who carried a threatening letter into the temple. The lesson was impossible to forget. Some battles are fought with courage. Some are fought with strategy. Some are fought with sacrifice. And some are not placed in human hands at all. This was one of them. 185,000 soldiers had come to erase Jerusalem from history. Instead, their defeat became part of Jerusalem's testimony. They came to prove that the city's God was powerless. Instead, they became evidence of his power. They came expecting the walls to fall. But when the morning came, Jerusalem was still standing. And the empire that seemed unstoppable had been stopped without a battle. Kingdoms rise. Armies march. Rulers boast. For a time, they appear permanent. Then history moves on.